Good evening. My name is Grace Hayek, and on behalf of the Glencoe Public Library, I welcome you to our webinar with author Douglas Tallamy. This program is jointly sponsored by the Glencoe Public Library, the Highland Park Public Library, the Friends of the Green Bay Trail, the Glencoe Sustainability Task Force, and the Bookstall in Winnetka. Tonight's program is being recorded and will be put into the library's YouTube channel within a few days. Your questions are very welcome. Please put them in the Q&A or in the chat, and I will ask them on your behalf at the end of the program. If you're interested in purchasing a signed copy of Mr. Tallamy's book, The Nature of Oaks, you can easily do so through the Bookstall. A purchase link will be placed in the chat. Thank you to the Bookstall for working with us on this event. Closed captioning is enabled for those who want it. You can opt into it by selecting live transcription and then show subtitles. Before we get started, I'm going to put a 2-question poll up on the screen like that to see how many we have with people we have viewing tonight and which is your home library. So I appreciate you filling that out if you could. Fascinating. So many more of you are from outside Glencoe or Highland Park than are in Glencoe or Highland Park. So welcome to you all. All right, I'm going to shut this down now. Before we introduce our presenter, I'm going to briefly hand the mic over to Meredith Clement. Meredith is a board member at the Friends of the Green Bay Trail, a public relations whiz, and the person who did the heavy lifting to make this presentation happen. And she's a joy to work with. Meredith, you can go ahead.
Welcome, and Grace, thank you so much for working with the Friends on inviting Doug to be with us and to facilitating tonight's meeting. I know it's going to be fascinating for all who are attending. For those of you who are outside our area, I'll just briefly describe who we are. The Friends of the Green Bay Trail celebrated its 10th anniversary last year. What was an impassioned effort by our founder, Betsy Leapson, to remove buckthorn that was just providing a very dense jungle-like canopy to the trail that runs through Glencoe. Turned into many years of challenges. The trail, as many of you, I hope, have visited or will visit, is a strip of land that parallels the North Shore train line coming from the city up to the northern suburbs. And it's very narrow, and it offers immense challenges in that it's narrow, it's rocky, it's compacted soil, it is flat ground, it has large slopes, it can be dry or wet in numerous areas, and it offers the microclimates of sun, part sun, shade, and deep shade. So that initial effort to restore the trail to a pleasurable, recreational, more inviting area certainly we were met with many challenges, and we've prevailed. We're very confident that our efforts are being seen and appreciated by all. We have a scientific estimate of how much we've contributed to the trail, and that's hundreds of thousands of dollars raised only through donations and grants. And we have removed thousands of buckthorn trees. We've replaced that with hundreds of shrubs and trees. And we have planted thousands of native plant plugs. And everything we put in is native to our area and hopefully will provide a very sustainable landscape for us. And our scientific estimate of all of the seeds that we have planted is jillions or gajillions. Because we collect the seeds from dried product at the end of the seasons, clean that, and then cast that and plant that in the spring. And so what you see is both that which we've planted and that which we've cast. And so we hope you'll enjoy the trail. We were also very, very, very pleased to hear the appreciation of our communities for having the trail available for recreation and access and safe recreation last year during the term of COVID. We have people coming from as far as the city, Chicago, and also from Wisconsin just to stroll or walk or to meet friends and get a cup of coffee and walk the length that goes through Glencoe. The other part of our mission has been outreach and public programming and highlighting environmental issues such as the need to support pollinators and to foster sustainable landscape practices in our own homes. Glencoe is very much on board with that. We have a growing population that is trying to transform their landscapes. And we brought in nationally recognized speakers, and we're so ecstatic to have Doug here tonight because I've heard him speak before, and I'm sure you'll find him just as engaging. And his research will certainly not be overwhelming. It is very, very helpful, and I'm confident you will look at the oak trees that are in your area. And I hope that everyone has many, because Illinois used to be primarily an oak savanna, but with population and advancement of communities and such, we've lost all of that wonderful savanna, except in certain patches here in Illinois. And Doug will certainly share and his knowledge of how valuable the oaks that we do have are to us and to sustaining healthy landscapes and ecologically supportive environments for our wildlife, which then therefore support the lifestyles we wish to lead. So please join us at any of our future programs. You can access our website, and we also encourage you to access the information provided by the Sustainability Task Force. And so thank you very much, Grace, again, for helping to facilitate tonight.
Thank you, Meredith. Thank you very much. Now let me tell you a little bit about our presenter. Douglas Talmy is the T.A. Baker Professor of Agriculture in the Department of Entomology and Wildlife Ecology at the University of Delaware, where he's authored 104 research publications and has taught insect-related courses for over 40 years. One of his top research goals is to better understand the many ways insects interact with plants and how such interactions determine the diversity of animal communities. His book, Bringing Nature Home, was published by Timber Press in 2007 and was awarded the 2008 Silver Medal by the Garden Writers Association. The Living Landscape, co-authored with Rich Darke, was published in 2014. Nature's Best Hope, a New York Times bestseller, was released in February 2020, and his latest book, titled The Nature of Oaks, was released by Timber Press in March of this year. Among his awards are the Garden Club of America Margaret Douglas Medal for Conservation and the Tom Dodd Jr. Award of Excellence, the 2018 American Horticultural Society B.Y. Morrison Communication Award, and the 2019 Cynthia Westcott Scientific Writing Award. Mr. Talmy, thank you so much for being here tonight. You can go ahead now.
Well, thank you very much, Grace. Let me screen share. I trust you can all see that. So a pleasure to be here tonight. I do want to talk about the nature of oaks that occurs on the oaks in my yard. What we're going to do is follow the life on the oaks that we planted in our property. And this is what our property looked like in 2000 when Cindy and I moved in. It was a piece of farm that had been chopped up into 10-acre lots, had been mowed for hay before we moved in. So our goal was to restore the eastern deciduous ecosystem and a few meadows and wetlands and things like that on that 10 acres. In other words, rebuild the biodiversity that used to be here by putting plants back. So we moved in July of 2000, and that fall, it turned out about a mile down the road, there were a couple of white oaks that were dropping acorns. So I said, well, that's a good start. We'll grab some of those acorns and plant them. And white oak acorns germinate in the fall. So right away, we got some satisfaction. Out came the root, down it goes. But that's all they do in the fall. It's in the springtime that they put up their first leaves. And that's all they do. They sit there. And it's one of the reasons that it gives oaks the reputation that they grow really slowly, because the first year, that's pretty much what they look like. In actuality, though, they are not growing slowly. They're just growing underground. We can't see them. In their first year, oaks grow 10 times more root biomass than leaf biomass. There's our little oak right there. It's surrounded by a deer cage. Got a lot of deer, and they love to eat those oaks, so we're protecting it. But there it is 18 years later, 45 feet tall, 47-inch circumference, canopy spread of 30 feet. We never watered it. We never fertilized it. It just did all this on its own. Now it's still a baby. It's certainly not a mature tree, but in terms of a landscape tree, it's there. It's good enough. One of the things, the points I want to make tonight is that oaks are a lifeline to an awful lot of species, including dozens of bird species, number of mammals, even the big guys, bears. If you have a big old oak that's hollow in the middle, the bears will spend the winter there. Raccoons, possums, a few reptiles, several butterflies, but hundreds of species of moths depend on oaks, as well as their predators and parasitoids. There are cynnipid gall wasps that we'll talk about that make those galls on oaks. A number of species of beetles, weevils, spiders, dozens more species of arthropods, mollusks, and annelids that live in the leaf litter underneath our oaks. So an entire diverse community of organisms depend on oaks. Unfortunately, this diverse web of life goes unnoticed by people who have oaks in their yard. And if it's unnoticed, it's certainly unappreciated. And that is exactly why I wrote this book. It is a month-by-month guide to the life that is on your oaks. It won't be exactly the same as we move around the country, but many of the same players will be on your oaks. All you have to do is go out and look at the appropriate time of year. Point is that knowledge about oaks or anything generates interest, and interest generates compassion. And believe me, we need a lot more compassion towards the natural world these days. So that was my motivation. Okay, first a few facts about oaks. They're in the genus Quercus. Contains 91 species in North America, so it's quite a large genus for trees. 435 species globally. The word Quercus comes from the Celtic quer, meaning fine, and ques, meaning tree. So oaks are fine trees, and they are indeed. There are four major taxonomic sections that are common in North America. The white oak group called Quercus, the red oak group called the Lobate group, live oak group is called the Verentes group, and there's a much smaller group in the West called the canyon oak group, Protobalanus. This is the distribution of oaks. The only place where there are no oaks would be the brown areas. There are no species of oaks that naturally occur there. It's just too dry or too far north. But every other place, including the white areas, has at least one species of oaks. The biggest diversity of oaks is in the Southeast, but California has a number of oaks as well. Oaks live a long time. An average healthy oak will live 900 years, believe it or not. That's 300 years of growth, 300 years of stasis, 300 years of decline. And each one of those periods, oaks are delivering unique ecological contributions to their landscapes. So I hear people say all the time, there's a 100-year oak, and they're probably saying, I've got an old oak. It's still a baby at 100 years old. The oldest oak that we know about in North America is the Middleton oak in Charleston, South Carolina. It's a southern live oak, 1,500 years old, a big fella. This was the Y oak in Y, Maryland. It was the largest white oak in the country. It fell over in a hurricane several years ago. I did get to see it before it fell over, so another big guy. And again, this gives people the impression that all oaks are gigantic. Some of them are, and we appreciate those gigantic guys, but there are many species that are much smaller, and they can be used in small landscapes. Another point from tonight's talk is that oaks have superior ecological function. They have the highest biodiversity value, and we'll talk about why. They're sequestering more carbon dioxide, pulling it out of the atmosphere and tying it up in their tissues, then holding it for hundreds of years, centuries. And the root system is huge, and it pumps that carbon into the soil, the extra carbon, and enriches the soil, turns it brown or black. But it's storing carbon dioxide, pulling it out of harm's way, and storing it in the soil. Very valuable these days. They're the best soil stabilizers because of those large root systems. They make the best leaf litter because it lasts longer than other tree leaf litter. And all of that promotes healthier watersheds. So we'll talk about each one of those things. We're going to start in October. And people say, why'd you start in October? Because that's when I started to write the book, October. My wife said, why don't you write a book about oaks? And it was October. So I did. That's what the oak looked like in October. And we're going to follow what's happening on my tree here all year long. October, of course, is the month when the acorns have dropped. We get to notice how many acorns they made that year. And oaks can make a lot of acorns. A single oak can produce up to 3 million acorns in its lifetime. A single acorn is something that's good to eat. It's full of protein, has fats in there, very nutritious, and lots of animals depend on acorns, including a number of rodents, of course, but bigger mammals as well. We talked about black bears living in oaks, but they also eat those acorns a lot. And we know the squirrels eat acorns, even those cute deer that we see all the time, they depend on acorns. A number of birds depend on acorns, particularly turkeys. They're scouring the forest, eating as many acorns as they can in the fall. Other birds too, red-bellied woodpeckers, titmice, towhees, who knew? Nuthatches eat acorns, flickers, many ducks, including especially the wood duck. Any oak or acorn that drops in the water, if a branch is overhanging the water, the acorns sink and the ducks dive down and get them, and they'll come out on land and eat a lot of acorns as well. Then there are a number of invertebrates that depend on acorns, like the acorn weevil. Here's a weevil larva tunneling out of an acorn, and that's what the adult looks like. A group of moths called acorn moths. They all look pretty much the same, but it's a complex of species that develop inside acorns. So with all these things depending on acorns, a few weeks after the acorns drop, if you look under an oak tree, this is what it looks like. All the acorns are eaten, squished, or removed. And you might wonder how oak trees ever successfully reproduce. And this is where jays come in. Turns out there's a very ancient mutualism between jays from all over the world and oaks. Both lineages evolved in Southeast Asia about 65 million years ago, so they're both very old. And they learned to work together in a profitable way long time ago. Jays, of course, are getting food from oaks in the form of those acorns, and jays are providing oaks with the ability to move farther and faster than any other tree genus in the world. This is how that works. Jays store acorns for winter food. They don't cache them in a pile. They can carry more than one acorn at a time, but they will store them individually, one here, one there. So they pick one up, then they'll fly up to a mile before they settle down and bury that acorn just beneath the surface of the soil. Now, if well, there you go, they're burying it down. If they think another jay has watched them do that, they know how jays think. Jays are stealers. So they will wait a few minutes, then they'll dig up the acorn and move it someplace else because they know that the other jay will steal it if they don't. And of course, the idea is that during the winter time, they will go back and get these acorns and have something to eat. Well, a single jay can bury up to 4,500 acorns each fall, particularly when there are mast years, when the oaks make a lot of acorns. But they only remember where 1 out of every 4 acorns is. So a single jay actually is planting 3,360 oak trees each year. And if the jay, after it's finished burying oaks in the fall, is killed by a sharp-shinned hawk or something else, all of the acorns that it buried will germinate. And that's why oaks can move farther and faster. That dispersal distance of taking the acorn up to a mile from the tree is much farther than any other acorn disperser. And the fact that they forget where they put them, they're really just planting oak trees. It's not just blue jays. This is a scrub jay from the West Coast doing the same thing. In November, you might realize that it was either a good year for acorns or a bad year for acorns, meaning there weren't very many. If it's a good year, we call it a mast year. Typically, the members of a single group, like the white oak group or the red oak group, all produce a lot of acorns in the same year. And it can be impressive. So impressive that ecologists try to figure out, why do oak trees mast? You know, most plants produce about the same number of seeds each year, and it's not extremely variable, but with oaks it is. So there are 4 hypotheses, 4 primary hypotheses: predator satiation, predator reduction, improved pollination, and energy partitioning. And we will talk about each one of these. They're not mutually exclusive. They all could be operating at the same time to explain why oaks mast. Let's talk about predator satiation. This is an acorn weevil larva, and acorn weevils can get really numerous on oak trees. Up to 90% of the acorns can have an acorn weevil inside of them. So if oaks made the same number of acorns every year, the population of acorn weevils and acorn moths and all the other things that depend on acorns would stabilize around that number and eat just about every single acorn. And that would be very tough on the oak in terms of reproduction. But if they have a variable number of acorns each year, so let's say they have a big mast year one year, the population of squirrels, the population of acorn weevils and acorn moths and all those other things will explode. And you have a lot of those creatures running around. And then the next year, the oaks make hardly any acorns. Then it reduces the predator. The populations crash. And usually there's several years between masts. So for several years, there'll be very few acorns, and the squirrels will stabilize down all around that low number. And then there's another mast year, and that's when the predator satiation happens. The predator populations are so low that when there's a mast year, there's more acorns than they can eat, and the oaks get to successfully reproduce. Improved pollination. Oaks are wind pollinated, which means they get pollinated by chance. And the pollen has to move from one tree to another. Even though both the male flowers and the female flowers are on a single tree, the female flowers on a tree open up after the male flowers release the pollen. So it's got to be pollinated by another tree that's a little asynchronized with it. And if the oaks are releasing tremendous amounts of pollen all at the same time, the chances of pollination improve. And finally, energy allocation. There rarely is enough energy to both grow and produce acorns in the same year. So some years oaks grow quite a bit, but produce very few acorns. And other years they produce a lot of acorns and grow hardly at all. Rarely do they do the same, both at the same time. So energy allocation, predator satiation, pollination, predator reduction, all of these things could be happening to explain why oaks mast. And by the way, if you're wondering whether oaks ever have good fall color, this is a scarlet oak in my yard. They do have good fall color. December is a time when you might notice another unusual feature about oaks, particularly in the white oak group. And the feature is that they don't drop their leaves. This is a deciduous tree that hangs onto its dead leaves all winter long. And this is particularly evident on younger trees and on trees, the lower branches of trees. It's a condition called marcescence, where they're hanging onto their leaves. And the primary explanation for marcescence involves the hypothesis that there were huge Pleistocene mammals around not that long ago, 9,000-10,000 years ago. There were still an awful lot in North America. This is a group of large mammals that occurred just in Mexico. 3 species of mammoths, the giant sloth that could reach up 18 feet, and many other things, many of which were browsers. Browsers, that's what deer do. They browse on the buds of woody plants. They're not spending a lot of time eating grass or other things. They're browsing on woody plants. Well, the oaks don't want their new buds eaten all winter long. So if they keep their old leaves surrounding those new buds, it's hard to get a mouthful of new buds without getting a mouthful of very untasty leaves. And it's also hard to eat oak leaves without making a lot of noise. And here are the predators that would attack and kill these guys if you were making noise while you were eating. So it's the herbivory by large Pleistocene mammals that probably explains why there were marcescent leaves on oaks. And another feature that supports that hypothesis is where those leaves are. They only go up about 18 feet. At the top here, no marcescent leaves. And that's as high up as the giant sloth could reach. So there's no reason to keep leaves up here if it's to protect against predation or herbivory, because there were no herbivores that could reach that high. Marcescence gives oaks a landscape feature that other deciduous trees don't have, and that is it can function as a screen, function very well as a screen, even in the wintertime. So it's a wonderful landscape feature. If you hate your neighbor and you want to screen them out, you can use an oak tree to do that. All right, January. It's cold, not much is happening. Most people do not spend a lot of time outside looking at nature. If you do and you're staring up in trees, you don't see much because there's nothing there, or at least that's what we always assumed. Occasionally, though, you will see a bird. Sometimes it's a golden crowned kinglet. Sometimes it's a chickadee. Sometimes it's a titmouse. And what you're seeing is these birds flitting around the branches, and it looks like they're foraging for food. Golden crowned kinglets have always been a puzzle. because they are small birds. They do not eat seeds. They're insectivores. They should have migrated, but they don't. So how are they getting through? How can an insectivore get through the winter when there aren't any insects out? Well, same thing with by the way, with come back here. With chickadees and titmice, they do come to our feeders. They eat seeds, but only 50% of their diet is seeds. The other 50% is insects and spiders. Where are they getting them from? Well, Bernd Eindrich asked that question. He's a wonderful naturalist. He's retired at this point, an entomologist, but he looks at all different kinds of animals. He writes the natural history column in the magazine Natural History every month. He asked the question, how are golden crowned kinglets living through the winter in Maine? And to answer that question, he looked in the crops of golden crowned kinglets and he found they were stuffed with caterpillars. So they're getting caterpillars up in the trees, and there's one of them. I climbed one of my oak trees in November a couple of years ago to pull a vine off of it. And when I came back down, my shirt was covered with caterpillars that were just spending the winter sitting on those branches. And many of them look like branches themselves, so we certainly don't recognize them. Most of them are geometrids, inchworms. They're in that family of moths. When it gets cold, these caterpillars have antifreeze proteins in their cells that keep the cells from bursting. So it can be well below freezing and the caterpillars are okay. They shrink a little bit, but then when it gets warm, they swell up a little bit and they spend the entire winter there, providing valuable food for these birds. So you might ask, what the heck are they doing there? Most other insects overwinter as eggs or as chrysalids or as pupae, a few as adults, but very few overwinter as larvae. And we don't really know, but we're guessing that the caterpillars that overwinter as larvae and are not eaten by birds have a head start over everybody else in the spring. They are fairly large already, and they can eat that flush of new leaves as soon as they come out without having to compete with anything else. So it gives them a little bit of a competitive advantage if they make it through the winter. February is the quietest time of year for oaks in terms of natural things happening on the tree. So it's a good time to talk about the landscaping myths that surround the use of oaks. Now, most myths do have some fact associated with them. So let's separate fact from fiction over these different, I hear these excuses all the time for why people don't plant oaks. They're too expensive. They grow too slowly to use as landscape plants. They're too big to put on small lots. And if you do put them there, they're going to fall over and crush your house or crush your car, or their roots will lift up your sidewalk or your driveway. So fact or fiction, let's talk about each one. Are oaks too expensive to put in your landscape? They can be if you insist on instant gratification, if you insist on planting a large tree. And a lot of people do. And of course, the nurserymen love to sell you large trees because they can charge you large amounts of dollars, like $3,000 to buy a large tree. If you buy a tree, and it doesn't matter what kind it is, but especially oaks that has been grown in a pot, you've made a serious mistake, because there is no way that tree is not root bound. Root bound is when the roots go round and round in a pot. And if it survives transplanting, it will continue to grow, but those roots will strangle each other and kill the tree in not too many years. So you spend a lot of money on a tree that has a very poor prospect of a long life. The other option for buying a big tree is a balled and burlap tree. That's a better option, except in order to ball and burlap a tree, you have to root prune it. You've got to cut off most of the roots that allowed the tree to get that big. And that's a terrible shock for the trees. It sets them way back. And when you plant them, in many cases, they have a 50% chance of dying. And if they don't die, they will sit there for a decade trying to rebuild the root system that allowed them to get that big. So they're there, but they're not growing. They're not going to be very healthy. If you plant an acorn or a small tree the same day that you plant this big guy, first of all, that will be free. And it will grow within that decade. It will grow and pass this tree and be much healthier and have a long life. So this is the size of an oak tree that you ought to be planting if you're not going to plant an oak tree. I mean an acorn. And of course, nurserymen don't want to sell them this size because they can't charge you very much. But that is the way you get a healthy oak. Do oaks grow too slowly? If you plant a tree when it's small like that, you're going to spend hundreds of years before you can appreciate it as a real tree. Well, let's have a race. Here's the oak that we're following here. It's 6 years old at this point. By the way, I've taken the deer cage off. It doesn't need a deer cage anymore. Let's have a race between this tree and my little friend Bella here. Everybody thinks she's my daughter, but she's not. She's just a friend's daughter who spent an awful lot of time at our house. She was born on my wife's birthday, so we watched her a lot. So she's 2 years old here. The oak is 6 years old. Here it's 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. Took each one of these pictures on Bella's birthday. 17, 18, 19, 20, 2020. Bella's got her mask on. She's finally through growing. She's tall. She's taller than me, believe it or not. But she's lost the race. The oak has really beat her out. And of course, the reputation of oaks, particularly oaks in the white oak group, is growing really, really slowly. It's just not deserved. Once you get past those first few years, they take off and grow as well as any other tree. The important thing is you don't have to wait very long at all for the oaks to start to contribute ecologically to your yard. This is a pin oak that has just popped its head above the leaves, and here's a caterpillar standing on the ground eating the leaves of that oak. So immediately, the very first year, they are contributing to your food web, and that is one of the main reasons that you're having oaks in your yard to begin with. Are oaks too large to use in small yards? Well, you're never going to find a landscape designer or landscape architect to recommend a large tree in a very tiny yard like this. Obviously, they used to do it because I can drive around and see it all the time. These are two big red oaks in tiny yards on the way in Newark, Delaware, on the way to the University of Delaware. They probably were planted the same time they built this house, which was more than 100 years ago. They have shaded that house for nearly 100 years, dropped its temperature 10 degrees during the summertime, protected it from cold winds during the wintertime. No, they haven't fallen over and crushed the house. They haven't lifted up the hardscape. But you're still not going to get anybody to recommend a large tree for a small space like that. It's just that it can happen. Here's a very large oak next to a very large church. And luckily, they didn't take it down. It could be the same thing where they planted this oak the same time that they built the church. But big oak in a very small space, and it's all worked out very well. Point is, there are a number of small oaks that we need to push in the marketplace a whole lot more than we do right now. In the east, we've got dwarf chestnut oak. Georgia oak is a little bit farther south. Occasionally, it's in the trade. We've got a number of small oaks associated with pine barrens. In the far south, we've got the dwarf live oak. It's a variety of the live oak that we see the Spanish moss hanging from. There's majestic pictures of the oaks in the south. Myrtle oak, Chapman oak. So we've got a lot of options for small oaks. I've got a dwarf chestnut oak in my yard. It produced acorns when it was 5 feet tall. So they don't get to be giants, and they're appropriate trees for small spaces. In the West, we have lots more options. There are many more species of small oaks. Some of them are even ground covers. Not all that many are in the trade, but they could be. They could be if we decided that they're important components of our yard landscapes. So we do have options, and we need to take advantage of those. There's my dwarf chestnut oak. There's its acorns, and I'm looking down on it to take that picture. Another option, though, is one that we're not using at all, but we could be, and that is coppicing. This is a red oak that was produced by cutting off a 4-inch diameter tree and just letting it regrow as a bush. That's coppicing. People used to do it all the time, and use the thin bush-like sticks that come up from the coppice trees for firewood, for all kinds of things. We don't do it much anymore, but we could do it if you wanted a tree that normally would be large in your yard in the shape of a bush. You'd still have the foliage that is supporting the food web very well. And it's an option that be fun to try out. Will oaks crush your houses if you plant them? They can. And you know, whenever they do, you hear about it on the news. We're very good at reporting all sorts of disasters on the news. We're not so good at reporting good news, but if something bad happens, you will hear about it. The reason these trees are falling over, and you can see it right here, is that they are planted as specimen trees. So we never plant trees next to each other. We want them to reach their full splendor, spread out their canopy, but it prevents them from interlocking their roots with other trees. So you get a wet period with wind and boom, over they go. This is the way trees typically grow in a forest. They get to interlock their roots and it's extremely stable, very difficult to blow over a grove of trees. A tornado will snap them off. There's nothing you can do to prevent damage from a tornado, but you can prevent blowover in typical high wind storms by interlocking roots. This is a stream cut that shows 1, 2, 3, 4 trees, how interlocked the roots are, very stable. There's no way they're gonna blow over. So instead of the specimen tree, let's consider groves of trees. So here we have 2 white oaks that seeded in themselves before this road was built. That's 3 feet there. So neither one is as big and splendid as it would be if it were alone, but if we view them as a unit instead of as individuals, they're much more stable. We still have all the ecological values that oaks are contributing, and we have minimized the risk of using these big trees. Here are 3 big trees in Northwest Connecticut called the Three Sisters, 3 oaks all interlocked with their roots. This is a tree grove purposely planted at Mount Cuba Center in Hockessin, Delaware. This is a DuPont estate. Big red oak back here, hemlocks in the front here. I guess that's a hemlock over there. We've got rhododendrons, the big rhododendrons down here. So you can tell how tall this is. And hardscape, these plants were put in the 40s. The 1940s, and they it looks like a natural habitat. So you've got real habitat in your yard. All the trees are very stable with their interlocked roots, but you're viewing them as a unit, as a group, not as individuals. But that's okay. It's still aesthetically pleasing. Now, before I leave this, there is an issue with some of the oak diseases. So when you plant oaks in a grove and they interlock their roots and one of them gets the oak wilt, it will transfer the oak wilt to another oak through the root system. A real problem. Oak wilt is a disease we brought in from Central America. But if you plant it, so your groves of trees don't have to be the same species. And this is a perfect example. That's the red oak, but these are hemlocks. Those roots are not going to be transplanting diseases back and forth to each other. So it might be a good idea to have groves of different species of trees, but it still stabilizes your trees. Will oaks lift up your hardscape? Possibly, but it typically depends on the species you pick and what your ground situation is. So if you're planting over bedrock, the roots have no option except to go along the surface, and they will lift up whatever comes into contact. If you're planting over an agricultural pan, a pan is where the plow went down maybe 12, 15 inches for a century, totally compacted the soil beneath where the plow went. And then if you plant a tree on top of that, the roots will go right along the top of the pan without going down. So break up your pan and the roots will penetrate deeply. But under normal soil conditions, the roots go way down. This is a pin oak. No problem here lifting up that hardscape. These are 2 very large red oaks at the University of Delaware. Look at the size of that tree next to this curb. No problem at all, because the soil was deep enough that the roots could go underneath. I would not put a willow oak right next to hardscape because those roots are fairly shallow, but you don't use willow oaks in Illinois anyway. So, okay, so much for oak landscaping myths. Let's move on to March, when those marcescent leaves finally start to drop. So the tree has held them all winter long. Now it's dropping the leaves, and it's a good time to talk about the value of leaf litter once those leaves hit the ground. So litter is probably not a good name for them. It's the leaf blanket that is protecting the soil community. First of all, their oaks make a lot of leaves. A big oak will make 700,000 leaves each year. And if you line them up next to each other, that'll cover 4 tennis courts. Tremendous variation in leaf size and shape in oaks. Some of them are quite large. Some of them are quite small. Some of them look like holly leaves. This is the emery oak in Arizona. Some of them look like willow leaves. That's a willow oak, the water oak. So a lot of variation there. But when they fall, they do a really important ecological job that we don't appreciate, and that is to protect the soil community. We don't have any plants without a healthy soil community. And all of those members of that soil community require high humidity. They require soil that is full of carbon and nutrients, and that is what leaf litter provides. There are more species that live underground than live above ground, and they live there in far greater numbers. But of course, they're small, so we don't tend to appreciate them. And while we're looking at this picture, it reminds me to tell you that, you know, we break up leaves and get rid of them because we're afraid they're going to squash our plantings. The plantings won't be able to get through. Under normal levels of leaf fall, though, they have no trouble getting through. I mean, what do you think they did before we were here to rake all the leaves away? Here's a fern grove, natural, nobody planted it, right next to this oak tree. Deep oak leaf litter here, but they have no trouble getting through. I'm doing a little experiment with phlox in my yard by not raking the leaves off the phlox patch to see how it does. And the first year of this experiment, no problem at all, came right through. And of course, the nutrient return for those phlox is very nice because I've left the leaves there. In a single square meter of soil underneath oak leaf litter, you can have 250,000 mites. You can have 100,000 springtails, columbolans. This is a sminthourid columbolan. You can have 90,000 proturans, which is funny. They're very primitive insects, tiny little white things. I used to teach insect taxonomy, and students had to make a collection, and getting a proturan was always a big challenge. There's 90,000 in a single meter, but they couldn't get them anyway. They could. They just didn't work very hard. 1 million nematodes. So a lot of things are in that single square meter if we have that oak leaf litter on the top. I say that oak leaf litter is the best leaf litter because a single oak leaf can take up to 3 years to break down. And when it does break down, all of these guys are detritivores. They're eating the leaf litter and breaking it down and returning the nutrients to the soil. So you have a steady state system. The nutrients are going up into the tree. The tree spends the year doing its thing, and then they drop the leaves. The nutrients go into the soil. Then they go up into the tree again, and you never have to add fertilizer. Most trees don't want any fertilizer, but they do want the leaves each year to stay on the property. There are some very pretty butterflies that depend on oak leaf litter, like the banded hair streak. That's a pretty common butterfly, but its larvae eat dead oak leaves on the forest floor, unless you rake them up or burn them or put them out for the trash. Then you don't have any banded hair streaks. There are 70 species of moths we call litter moths that eat leaf litter, like the ambiguous litter moth or the American idea or the dark-spotted palthus and 67 other species that all disappear when we throw away our leaf litter. And of course, then we have the predators that depend on all of those things living in leaf litter, like a number of species of ground beetles, all the spiders that I don't like to talk about because people don't like spiders, but they're really important predators that are out there. Centipedes, millipedes. It's a thriving community, but we have to have the leaf litter. If we take the leaf litter away, the soil dries out, it gets sun-baked and cracks open. So all the community disappears. Then you have a rainstorm and it erodes the soil away. Nothing good happens when you don't have leaf litter. And the leaf litter from most trees, like maples, tulips, birches, they don't even last through the first year. They by July, those leaves are all broken down and gone. And then you do have bare soil. So that's the value of oak leaves. Okay, April, that's when the buds of the trees finally break open. And it's your chance to see one of the most ephemeral interactions in all of nature. It only lasts about 5 minutes a year. So you have to be ready. And I'm talking about actually watching when synipid gall wasps lay their eggs in the buds of oak buds, of oak trees. This is a female synipid gall wasp. So this is the little hymenopteran, little wasp that's going to create the galls on your trees. This little pipe right here is her ovipositor. She's laying an egg in here. This is a male synipid who is riding her. He's not mating with her now. He already has mated with her, but he's staying with her because after she lays that egg, she's going to mate again. And he wants to be the guy to be there to do it. This is another male who wants him to go away so that he can be the guy to do it. So he's going to hang around. Maybe they'll have a tussle there. But so there she is. She's laying her eggs in the bud. And along with the egg, she's injecting plant hormones that manipulate the growth of the stem cells, the meristematic cells that are in these buds. People liken galls to cancerous growth. I don't like that analogy because cancerous growth, it's uncontrolled growth. It just keeps growing and growing, and that's why cancer's a problem. This is highly controlled growth. It creates a species-specific gall of a species-specific shape and size. And it's really a compromise between the synipid galler and the oak tree in terms of what the shape of that gall is going to look like. Here's a female galler. She's just laid an egg in this bud. I put a little string around the bud so I could follow what happens. And that's the gall that it turned into a few weeks later. Oaks support 5,000 species of synipid gallers around the world, many of them here in North America. A single oak tree can support 70 species of gallers. So they're pretty common out there. And many of these galls are actually hollow. This is the apple oak gall. And if you cut it open, you see there's a lot of hollow space in here. The actual synipid gall wasp larva is in this capsule in here. It's actually a very hard capsule, but this is all open space. And you might ask, what is this for? Well, it actually does have a very important function, and that is to keep the parasitoids, other species of Hymenoptera, of little wasps that lay their eggs in synnipids to develop. It turns out that synipid gallers have more species of parasitoids that attack them than any other type of insect. So they've got to protect themselves from these natural enemies. Notice the size of the ovipositor on this pterimid wasp. So this space here has to be bigger than the length of the longest ovipositor of the species of parasitoids that want to put an egg inside that synipid galler. There's only a brief period when this gall is expanding that they're vulnerable to those parasitoids because it grows so fast and gets them beyond the point where those ovipositors can reach them. That's why these galls are hollow. They come in lots of sizes and shapes. Some of them are quite beautiful. Many of them look like plant diseases, but each one of these is actually a synipid gall. Some are on the leaves, some are on the stems, some just are decorative. They look like Christmas tree ornaments. Others, again, look like plant diseases, but they're not. Some look like pottery. Some look like brains. So all kinds of shapes and sizes out there. This is one of the larger galls on Quercus garryana, the Oregon oak, Oregon white oak, very common out in the West. These holes are where the galler has actually left the gall. And it turns out that galls have played a very important role in the recorded history of humans. If you crush up a gall of this nature and add particular chemicals, it turns into an indelible black ink. And that is the ink that was used to record most of human history for thousands of years. The Bible was written with gall ink. The Magna Carta was written with gall ink. So was the Declaration of Independence. Those monks and scribes that wrote down everything in the Middle Ages, it was all gall ink. So we wouldn't know what was going on if we hadn't had galls. After the marcescent leaves drop, April is a really good time to look for Polyphemus cocoons on your oak tree. And if you find one, that'll be a special day because these guys are disappearing. It's one of the species that is suffering from insect decline. Polyphemus moths, of course, are giant silk moths. This is the cocoon that is spun and then hangs all winter. And typically you can't see it during the winter because the marcescent leaves are covering it up. But once they drop, these are silvery and large. You can pick them right out. That's what the caterpillar looks like. It's a sausage shape, big green thing. It's highly sought after by cardinals. They love to feed their young, these big juicy caterpillars. And that's what the adult looks like. It's the second largest giant silk moth in North America. Great form of entertainment for your kids if you find one. But again, they're disappearing. They're disappearing for lots of reasons, but having our lights on at night is one of the major reasons that we're losing our giant silk moths. So turn your lights out if you can. Okay, May is when the full biological year really springs forth because the leaves expand to their full size in May. And along with that leaf expansion in the springtime comes, of course, the caterpillars that eat those leaves. And along with those caterpillars come the birds that eat those caterpillars. It is no coincidence that birds migrate up from Central and South America just as those populations of caterpillars become available on the new expanding leaves. And it's also no coincidence that most of the birds that are migrating are looking for food in our oaks. You can ask any birder at all, where do you look for warblers in the spring? You go to an oak tree. And we actually quantified that. One of my students years ago, Christy Beal, measured the number of minutes that warblers were foraging in trees of different families, mature trees in cemeteries. And this first bar here, that's the Fagaceae. That's the family that oaks are in. It includes the chestnuts, American chestnut, and beeches, but there were no American chestnut and beeches in her sample size. So these are all oaks, and here are the pines and the birches. And so a little bit of foraging in these other trees. The birds would go there and say, is there anything here? Nope, there isn't. Then they go to the oaks. Why? Because that's where the food is. The food is caterpillars, and the oaks are filled of things like the purple-crested slug, or the buck moth, or the white-marked tussock moth, or the saddled prominent, double-line prominent, white-dotted prominent, checkered fringe prominent, the laugher, the lace-cap caterpillar, the two-spotted oak punky, the skiff moth, the white-blotched heterocampa, oblique heterocampa, the variable oak leaf caterpillar, the banded tussock moth, hickory tussock moth, redline panapoda, the yellow neck caterpillar, the smaller parasa, the unicorn caterpillar, the crown slug. They're called slug caterpillars because the head is tucked up underneath, not because they're really slugs. The streaked dagger moth, the epilated dagger moth, the lesser oak dagger moth, the greater oak dagger moth, the afflicted dagger moth, the red humped oakworm, the orange humped oakworm, the pink striped oakworm, the confused wood grain, the spiny oak slug, and the spun glass caterpillar, which I think is the coolest caterpillar in North America. And literally hundreds more species are found on our oaks. So here's what our house looks like today. The plants have grown back. We put a lot of the plants back. Have a little bit of lawn here. We're very traditional. But about 4 years ago, I made it a goal to try to take a picture of every single moss species that is making a living on our property now. And I'm up to 1,137 species that I've photographed in my yard. We have 10 acres. Pennsylvania is 2.4 million acres. That's where we live, Pennsylvania. So in 1/240,000th of the land mass of Pennsylvania, we have 44% of all the moths that occur in the entire state. And we have them because we put the plants that support those moths back. 30%, almost 30% of the moths in my yard develop on oaks. So oaks are really important in terms of making caterpillars. And caterpillars are the most important group of organisms in terms of transferring energy from plants to other animals, particularly vertebrates. Particularly birds. You're not going to have birds if you don't have caterpillars, and you're not going to have caterpillars if you don't have a lot of oaks. That's why I call oaks keystone species. Remember what a keystone is? That's a keystone. No, that's an arch. That's the Roman arch. The keystone is the stone in the middle of the arch. And when you take it out of the arch collapses. Well, I'm calling these plants keystone species because they're making most of the food. If you take them out of the local food web, the food web collapses. Just 5% of our native plants are making 75% of the caterpillar food that drives our food webs. 14% of our native plants are making 90% of the caterpillar food that drives our food webs. So think of the keystone plants in your yard as the 2x4s that are holding up the ecological house that you're building. You can't build a house out of wallpaper. So they're essential to your ecological house, but they're not the only thing that's going to be in your house. You're not through building your house when you use keystone plants. It turns out that oaks are the best keystone plant in 84% of the counties of North America. In the mid-Atlantic states, they're supporting 557 species of caterpillars, over 950 species nationwide. And there's no other plant genus that comes close to that in terms of productivity. So in terms of supporting the life around us, there's nothing that beats oaks. And they're really essential to our local ecosystems. So the first question I always get is which oaks are best? Which ones are going to support the most life? I actually had a student start to look at that this summer. Here are his results. He compared 16 species of oaks, but some of them didn't have enough replicates to include in here. He's looking at the average area of leaf area eaten, which is the measure of the caterpillar use throughout the season. White oaks were better than anything else in terms of supporting caterpillars, but not much better. Not much better. All of these oaks in here were essentially the same. The only oaks that differed significantly were these few oaks at the bottom here that were out of their historic range. So this is Quercus nigra, which is the water oak. It's really a southern oak. Where is it? Quercus nigra. This is Quercus fellows, the willow oak. We're at the very northern limit of these guys, and the life that depends on these species is not this far north. This right here is Quercus acutissima. It's the Chinese sawtooth oak. So it's the only imported oak in our study site. And you might wonder, well, what are all these things eating in here? It turned out they were Japanese beetles. So here's a beetle from Asia eating the oak from Asia. And the Japanese beetles didn't eat any of the other types of oak. So I'm not sure that's a legitimate measure of what it's contributing to our local landscapes. I think it's more important that you pick oaks based on the soil type and the amount of moisture that you have, rather than how well they're going to support your life, because all these oaks are going to support life better than most other trees. Why do we need all these caterpillars, by the way? Why do we need oaks to make all these caterpillars? We need them because other things need these caterpillars, particularly birds. I'm sure you've heard me say at some point that it takes 6,000 to 9,000 caterpillars to make one clutch of chickadee, to get one clutch of chickadees to the point where they leave the nest. And the parents continue to feed them caterpillars another 21 days after they leave the nest. So that's tens of thousands of caterpillars to feed one bird that's 1/3 of an ounce. And you know, where are they going to get those caterpillars? They're not going to get them from ginkgos that make 0 caterpillars, or from crepe myrtles that make 0 caterpillars, or for most of the introduced trees that we have, Bradford pears, all of these trees from Asia are not producing the number of caterpillars that our birds need to reproduce. And most of our other native plants aren't either. Tulip trees support 21 species, not hundreds like oaks. So oaks are incredibly important to our local food webs. Okay, June, cicada month. This was the year that we had the periodical cicadas. 17-year brood came out at our house. 13-year brood is further south, didn't come out this year. But these are periodical cicadas that spend all those years underground as nymphs, feeding on roots, where they're feeding on xylem, which is essentially water. There's almost no nutrients in xylem at all. So they grow really slowly, but then they're highly synchronized in when they come out. You can predict it. Everybody was ready for it, including the media. The media said, well, they're going to come out. It's going to be a terrible scourge and we should all fear it. And they're going to sing and drive us crazy. We're going to kill our babies. They called it an invasion. Everything nasty about our poor cicadas. For an entomologist, though, my old lab mate, Mike Raup, called them, it's the Super Bowl for entomologists. It's really one of those fantastic biological events that you'll ever be privileged to witness. The next time periodical cicadas come out at my house, I will be 87 years old. I hope I see it, but I took advantage of it this year because I might not see it. And it was a good one. This was at the University of Delaware. A lot of cicadas came out. And when they do, they leave holes. They aerate the soil more effectively than any machine can do. So it's actually very good for the root systems of your trees, but they were numerous. It was interesting. There were 11 Mississippi kites that flew up to Newark, Delaware to eat our cicadas, and they spent 2 weeks there doing it. So people like the cicadas, but birders from all over came to see the Mississippi kites rather than the cicadas. Life cycle's pretty simple. They crawl out at night because it takes them a while to emerge, and it's a dangerous thing to do. Then they split the skin of their nymph. It's called an exuvie, and they hang down and swing up and grab onto it, then hang from the top. And they're like a soft shell crab at this point. So they can't move until they harden up their exoskeleton. When they do, they're orange and black, and that's when they can fly off. And when they do, the males will start to sing. What they do is they move it's a sclerotized plate next to a little chamber. that clicks like a Coke can. So you can click it, click, 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 only they do it, I don't know what, 1,000 times a second or something. And it creates this buzz over and over and over again. You get used to it. But what the male is doing is calling in a female. And if he's successful, the females are looking for the males that are singing the loudest, and they will choose them and mate. And then the female is going to lay her eggs. Here's her ovipositor. It's a highly sclerotized sword, really, and she shoves it right in. This is a pin oak branch in my front yard. She shoves it right into the branch. If you ever tried to do that with a pin, you'll see how hard that is to do. But she does it. She shoves it all the way in, up, and then come back. Lays an egg and successfully moves down the branch like that. So each one of these little disturbances here is an egg. And then those eggs will hatch, and the little guys fall to the forest floor and then tunnel in the ground and start sucking on plant roots. And they will do that for the next 17 years. But from the point where the eggs were laid on out, the branch often dies, and that's called flagging. And this is what flagging looks like. So this was a pretty heavy flagging on an oak tree. A lot of people get upset about that, say, oh, it's going to kill my tree. It's not going to kill your tree. This is nature's pruners. It happens once every 17 years. The tree won't even know it after a few months. Where do they like to lay their eggs? On oaks. I had another student look at that, as we have pin oak, white oak, willow oak. The green bars are the ones that had the most flagging on it in Newark, Delaware. Here's pin oak down here, but I noticed the pin oak in my yard, it was heavily oviposited in, lots of egg scars, but it didn't flag once. So it could be the pin oaks are a little bit more resistant to flagging, but they are actually receiving a lot of eggs. So the cicadas prefer oaks. And then they die, and that's the end of it for another 17 years. Why do they spend 17 years underground? Well, we're almost certain that it's again for predator satiation. There is no predator that can stabilize its population around something that emerges once every 17 years. There are things that eat cicadas, the squirrels, the birds, they eat a lot of cicadas, but there's never enough squirrels or birds around to eat all the cicadas that come out at once when they're highly synchronized like that. July is when the night chorus starts. And if you've done any camping near an oak forest, you know what I'm talking about. I'm talking about katydids that rub the males rub the two parts of their wings together. There's a scraper and a file up here, and it makes a characteristic sound. And this is why they do it. This is a true story. Once upon a time, there was a young woman named Katy who fell in love with a handsome young man. Alas, he did not share her feelings, and he married another. Soon thereafter, he and his young bride were found poisoned in their bed. Who perpetrated the crime was never determined, but some say the insects in the trees were watching that night, and each summer they solved the mystery by singing, "Katydid, Katydid." I did a lot of camping when I was growing up, and that sound sang me to sleep on many, many nights. I love that sound. So what are they doing there? These are males trying to attract females, and the loudest male is the male that the female will decide to mate with, because it's a signal of the male's size and the quality of his genes. She's trying to mate with the most fit male, and loudness is the way she's judging him. This is what a female looks like just before she matures. Here's her ovipositor. It's a spatula-shaped structure. She hasn't developed her wings yet. There are 4 species of katydids that frequent oak forests. The wings are completely developed. But when she is matured and she has chosen a male to mate with, then she lays her eggs along a stem. She glues them there. They're quite large. Here, these eggs have already hatched, but you often see these eggs laid on stems, and you wonder what they are. Those are katydid eggs. Okay, we're into August now. August presents the biggest challenge for the things that eat oak trees for 2 reasons. The leaves are really, really tough. After a full summer, they get tougher every day, filled with tannins, filled with lignins. So that's a problem for the things that eat oaks. And it's also the time that the natural enemies that control the things that eat oaks build up the highest. Let's talk about those tough leaves first. One of the mechanisms around leaf toughness is to feed gregariously. And that's very common in oak feeders during August. This is the yellow-neck caterpillar when it's young, and apparently they can get through those tough leaves when a lot of mouths are chewing at the same time. Here they are when they're older. They still are feeding together, and because they're all feeding together, they can strip the leaves of an entire branch. And again, people see that and say, yikes, they're going to kill my tree. They're not going to kill your tree. This is the orange humped oakworm, the pink striped oakworm. They're all gregarious. They're all doing the same thing. I counted 115 yellow-neck caterpillars on the lower branches of our tree here. And I think this was 2014. And then I stood back and took this picture so that I can ask you, do you see any of those caterpillars? No. Can you see the branch they were feeding on? No. But this is the distance at which we view our trees. If I knocked on your door, though, and said you got 115 yellow-neck caterpillars on your tree, most people would react by grabbing the spray can or calling the man, spray the tree, kill the caterpillars, save the tree. You don't have to save the tree. The tree is designed to pass on part of its energy so that you have other life forms in your yard. And thank goodness oaks are good at doing that. I met a woman in New Orleans several years ago, Tammany Baumgarten, who suggests that we all practice the 10-step program. Take 10 steps back from our trees, and all of our insect problems disappear because you can't see them anymore. And this is the distance at which we view our trees. So put that spray can away. You don't need it. Another mechanism for getting around the things that are the toughness of oak leaves is to become a leaf miner. All the toughness is in the upper epidermis and the lower epidermis, and the palisade mesophyll, the parenchymal cells inside the leaf are still tender. That's where all the nutrition is. So if you're small enough that you can mine those two leaf layers, you have access to lots of good food. But you do have to be small. This is a serpentine leaf mine. The egg was laid here, it hatched, and the little teeny caterpillar crawled between the leaf layers there. It got bigger as it came along here. The black line in the middle is its poops, its frass. And then it pupated here and then emerged. This is a blotch leaf mine. There's the caterpillar right in there. It just goes around in a circle, making a bigger blotch. You can easily find these on trees. Here it is backlit, so you get to see the caterpillar in there. The little black things are its frass. And here it is, real nice picture by Salvador Batenza. Doesn't look much like a caterpillar, but you've got to be very specialized to be a leaf miner. The adults do look like moths, though. They're small, but this is one of the Camerameria species that is on oaks, the solitary oak leaf miner, gregarious oak leaf miner, the oak tentiform leaf miner. There are a lot of species of moths that have gotten around leaf toughness by becoming tiny leaf miners. It's also the most dangerous time to be a caterpillar on an oak. This is the yellow striped oakworm that has just been stung by a potter wasp. It is now paralyzed. She's going to carry that caterpillar away and put it in one of her mud pots and then lay an egg on it. And then the egg's going to hatch and eat this caterpillar alive. So it sounds gruesome, but it's actually a mechanism to keep the meat fresh. This is nature's refrigerator. If she killed that caterpillar when she stung it, it would rot before the egg even hatched. But this way, the caterpillar stays fresh and is something good to eat all the way until the larva matures. These are the eggs of the yellow-neck caterpillar. They're laid gregariously, and minutes after the adult laid those eggs, a tiny little inserted wasp, a little egg parasitoid, showed up and started to lay her eggs inside these caterpillar eggs. And she had, almost 50% of them. And here they are emerging. This is one of the natural enemies that depresses the herbivore populations on our trees. So we don't need the spray can. They take care of it. Another group of parasitoids, we call them parasitoids, by the way, because they kill their host. The parasite doesn't kill its host, but the parasitoids do. Tachinid flies. There are thousands of species of tachinid flies. Most of them are parasitizing caterpillars, but other species parasitize lots of types of insects. And what they do is they lay an egg on the outside of the insect, like this saddleback caterpillar. That egg will hatch and tunnel into the caterpillar and eat its internal organs. Here's a tachinid larva that is already inside. That's its breathing tube stuck out to the the cuticle so that it can breathe. And here's a little pteromelid wasp laying eggs in the saddleback caterpillar. This caterpillar is dead 3 times over. And this is typical for caterpillars in August. It is very difficult for a caterpillar to make it through to maturity in August because of the number of natural enemies that are out there. This is a contracted Daytana with 4 tachinid eggs on it. These haven't hatched yet, but this guy is already hatched, tunneled into the caterpillar, and it will kill it. This is the defense against tachinid flies. It's a black blotched Caesura who has 3 permanent white markings that look just like tachinid eggs on its rear end. And the fly comes along and says, "Oh, it's already been parasitized. I will leave it alone." Very effective defense. Another defense is to simply roll off the leaf and hang by a thread, a silken thread. You can't see it here until the danger passes. And it's very easy. You go out at night, you can see caterpillars hanging from leaves all the time. You can see it during the day too, but it's easy to see at night. It doesn't always work though. These are Braconnid wasps that are looking for those caterpillars. And some species have figured out that they can actually pull up hand over hand with their first pair of legs, pull up that silken thread and lay an egg in the wasp. Or they'll actually shinny down the silken thread and lay an egg while the caterpillar's down there. So again, it's very, very tough time to be a caterpillar in August. There are some species of caterpillars that don't even bother trying to eat at night. They will just hang from a thread all night long and then resume during the day. September, our final month. This is when crickets mature. So we know about the black crickets on the ground singing, but there are a couple species of tree and bush crickets, which are not black, they're yellow or green, and they're up in trees singing away, doing the same thing that the cicadas and the katydids do. The males are singing, trying to attract females, and they want to be the loudest male so that the female will choose them. But these guys are very clever. They find a hole in a leaf, or they chew a hole of the appropriate size. Then they stick their head through the hole like this and raise their wings up and sing in that hole. Now, most of the leaves are cupped like a parabola, and it projects the sound out louder and farther than it would if he was on a flat surface, sending a false message that he's a louder male than he really is. So the females fall for that. They come, they mate with him. But it could be okay because he could be a smarter male, maybe not louder, but he's smart enough to fool the female, and maybe that's good enough. September is also the time you're most likely to see walking sticks. These are orthopteroid type insects that are called walking sticks because they look like sticks and they walk. This is a picture I took on an emery oak in Arizona. Again, it looks just like a holly, but we don't see them here very much. They spend their entire life in the canopy of trees. And then in the fall, when the leaves start to come down, they'll come down too. Occasionally, the numbers build up to the point where they can actually defoliate an oak forest. You read about that in West Virginia. I've never seen it, but that's what they say. All right, we have gone through the year. So let's wind up talking about something that you already know about. And that is the fact that we humans have created a serious biodiversity crisis on planet Earth. We always hear about things disappearing. You know, the World Wildlife Fund says 2/3 of wildlife has disappeared from Earth in the last since 1970. They're not disappearing. You know, we've lost 3 billion birds because we're killing them, not because they're disappearing. There's no mystery here. We're killing our insects. That's why we've got global insect decline. The Earth has now experienced its 6th great extinction event because we kill everything around us. So it's a biodiversity crisis. The good news is it has a grassroots solution. We, all of us, can stop doing that. We can stop killing everything around us. There are 4 things that every landscape has to do. Every landscape has to capture carbon these days, way too much carbon in the atmosphere, and plants can pull an awful lot of it out and lock it up in their tissues and then put it in the ground. Every landscape has to help manage the watershed in which it lies. Everybody lives in a watershed, and nobody has the ethical right to destroy it. Every landscape has to support a diverse community of pollinators, not because they pollinate our crops, but because they pollinate 80% of all plants and 90% of all flowering plants. If we lost our pollinators, we lose 80 to 90% of the plants on the planet. Not an option. And every landscape has to support a complex food web that supports all the animals that run the ecosystems on which we all depend. When you plant an oak tree, you are addressing 3 of those 4 major landscape goals. You're planting a tree that's going to capture more carbon than other plants throughout its lifetime. It's going to manage the watershed better than other plants because it has a great canopy that protects the ground from pounding rain, so you don't get compacted soil. And it also has a big root system that will absorb those all of those downpours. It's going to support a more complex food web than any other plant. The only thing it doesn't do better than other plants is support a diverse community of pollinators because it's wind pollinated. But 3 out of 4 is pretty good. I'll take that any day. Unfortunately, despite all of these landscape attributes, our oaks are in trouble today. The old giants are gone for the most part because we logged them right away. They were very valuable wood. The percentage of oaks in our eastern forests has been cut in half in the last 100 years for several reasons. We've suppressed fire. Oak trees like fire. It depresses cherries and maples and other things and favors oaks. Plus, we high graded our forests during logging. In other words, we took the very best trees and left the worst. We still do that in an awful lot of places. And the best trees are often oaks, so they're logged first. We've also introduced a number of very serious oak pests like gypsy moth, a number of serious oak diseases, which are killing our oaks. So now 21 of our 91 oak species, North American oak species, are threatened, and 1/3 of the global oaks are actually in danger. Many oaks have very small distributions, and when you put a housing development on that distribution, you have put them into danger. The Oregon white oak, for example, used to have a distribution from mid-California all the way up through Washington, northern Washington. It has lost 97% of its range because most of that area was good agricultural land. There are 2,300 species of plants and animals that rely on oaks in Great Britain that are threatened because of the loss of oaks in Great Britain. And you've heard they're rebuilding the roof of the Notre Dame Cathedral using oaks in France. They're using 6,000 large oak trees to rebuild that roof, which is probably all the big oaks that occur in France. So we humans live our lives during a very brief instant of ecological time, and we cannot return the ancient oaks to their landscapes during that instant. But we can start the process. And in no time at all, if we plant oaks today, they will become large enough to fully assume their keystone positions in our yards. They won't be ancient, but they will be on the way. Everybody is responsible for good earth stewardship because everybody requires healthy environments. Whether you call yourself an environmentalist or not, you absolutely require high-functioning ecosystems. So the best way to exercise your responsibility towards earth stewardship is to embrace the power of oaks. So for the sake of turkeys, for the sake of chickadees and woodpeckers and warblers and jays and thrushes and emeralds and prominence and gallers and weevils and orthopterans, plant an oak, plant a living community, plant the future. Thanks very much.
How do the oaks from a family synchronize their masting? Is there some biochemical communication, or do environmental factors determine which years they'll produce more? Subsequently, are the growth rings in the trunk smaller in the mast years? And thanks for the great talk.
We don't know. It used to, there are a lot of factors that people have suggested as being part of masting, and one would be the weather. So if it rains when the catkins are out, it could suppress pollination, or if the weather's perfect, everybody could be pollinated very well. The problem with using weather as an explanatory variable is that the 2019 masting that we had in the Red Oak group went from Massachusetts to Georgia all the way to the Mississippi, which covered a lot of different weather systems and a lot of different latitudes, and they all masted at the same time anyway. So it was something other than weather that synchronized them. So I don't know. I don't know what synchronizes them, but and I don't think anybody else does either. Do the rings represent high growth rings? I think they do. So I think you can pick out mast years by looking at oak rings. That's a good question. I
We
think
have an,
so, but I'm going to check it out. So
that's wonderful to know we have a new question. We have another one from Lisa asking, can you please talk about oak wilt? She has lost 6 oaks to the wilt.
it's a disease we brought in from Central America. And it's like all the other diseases we bring in from someplace else. It's clobbering our susceptible trees. The good news is not all members of these species are susceptible. So there's a small percentage that have some level of resistance. And unfortunately, we're going to have to let them win out over the years, the decades, and replace the ones that die. I've got oak bacterial leaf scorch, not just at my house, it's all over the place here, and it's clobbering the red oak group. It's clobbering our red oaks, our black oaks, our pin oaks, but I've got red oaks that are perfect, they're untouched. So I'm going to lose some this year, and this is where the jays are actually helping out, because it's the healthy trees that make the biggest acorns, and the jays favor the heaviest acorns. So they will be moving around the resistant acorns much more than any acorn that's from a sick tree. And over the years, we will get resistance, but people typically say, or I hear, horticulturists and landscape people say, let's stop planting oaks because they're just going to get sick. I say just the opposite. Let's plant twice as many so that when the ones get sick, we can weed them out and find those resistant genes. We've got to beat these diseases. We cannot afford to lose our trees. That goes for ashes as well. There's a tiny amount of resistance in there. Plus, we're getting biocontrol help for the emerald ash borer. So to simply give up on these forest trees that all those creatures depend on is just not an ecological option. We have to keep going. It'd be great if we stopped bringing in these diseases, but I know that's hard.
We have another one that is very applicable to our current location here in Illinois. What is the best kind of oak for a compacted clay soil? We all suffer tremendous deposits of clay in our gardens locally.
I would say I don't live there, but doesn't bur oak do pretty well in those conditions?
We have quite a number of them locally, but yeah. So
that's another one I'll look up. What does well in compacted clay? Swamp white oak and any of the oaks of the swamp, like pin oaks, they're adapted to those clayey regions, so they be good. But I'll check that out as well.
Okay. And we have another one that says, is it possible for us living in the city or suburbs with sewers and underground utilities to really plant oaks? Don't they damage underground utilities?
Well, it limits you. There's no doubt about it. And it's one of the reasons we don't have 900-year-old trees, because they always run into something. But, you look at some of our bigger cities like Washington, D.C., for example, they've got oaks all over the place. So tells me that it's possible. I know the engineers don't want any plants or anything anywhere, because it might hurt their structures. We've got to reach a compromise. I would say we go with the small species and hope for the best.
And Dor has a wonderful comment for our viewers, in that she says, if you have no room in your yard, most municipalities, including Glencoe on the North Shore, share the cost of planting on your parkway. So if your front lawn is too narrow or limited, then consider contacting your community to see if they'll support a planting on the parkways, which is terrific.
Great.
Okay, we have, please, this may be have been addressed. Can you please talk more about the treatments of oak disease and our part in the spread and control of it?
I don't think there is good control. I hope I'm not giving you bad information, but I know you can spend a lot of money and then they die anyway. Bad answer. But,
we understand. Okay, and we, another Glencoe resident has stated, we have a 50-inch diameter oak and our neighbors are planning to tear down their house and build a new house, is there a formula for how far away the footprint of a new home should be to avoid damaging the oak?
Well, you're talking about damaging the oak roots, and unfortunately, they go a long way. Somebody decided to, in England, they were trying to find how far the king's oak, Quercus robur roots go out from the center of the tree, and they did it by digging up the roots. They got out 300 feet, and then they quit. The roots just kept going and going and going. So I don't know how close your neighbor's yard is, but the roots go well beyond the canopy drip line. So that is a landscaping myth. They go much farther than that. So the farther away, the better. But it's part of the problem of living close together. I don't know that you're going to be able to keep your neighbor from building there, but if they could be gentle and not put a big trench right next to your oak, that would be great.
That's Q&A, and now I'm scrolling through our, that was our chat room, looking through the Q&A. Another question from Beth is, how damaging is it if a homeowner mulches leaves with a lawnmower and then leaves them in the garden beds? Does that damage the value of the leaf?
It reduces it. You're chopping up all the things that live in those leaves. So those leaves are filled with little cocoons. They're filled with, I think 94% of the caterpillars in oaks drop from the oak tree and either spin a cocoon in the leaf litter or they tunnel underground underneath that tree. So if you run it all through the lawnmower, you've chopped all that stuff up. You've also reduced the length of time the leaf litter will last by chopping it up. So normal oak leaf will last 3 years, but if you run it through the mower, I don't know, if you get 1 year out of it, you're probably lucky. People do it because it looks nicer, but it really does reduce the value of the oak leaves. I still would say that's better than buying wood chips, because you're at least returning the nutrients that tree needs to the soil.
Okay. And one more, let's see, question here. I think we're all curious. Do you actually climb your oak tree to observe all the caterpillars that live on them?
No, I don't. And that's a good question. I just turned 70 this summer. I'm not climbing my oak trees too much anymore. But all the pictures and things I take, I'm just walking on the ground.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the advantage of planting a tree small and then watching it grow, because it spends a lot of years where the branches are within, your height. They're not 200-foot trees where the first branch is 50 feet up. That would limit your availability or your access to them. So I've been lucky in that sense, but no, I stay on the ground.
And that's it. I think that's wise for all of us, actually. And then another portion of that question is, do different kinds of caterpillars live at different heights on the tree, such as the crown, the middle, and the lower branches? And is that maybe because of the different kinds of bird species use different parts of the tree? Or is it a menu selection?
It's very poorly studied, because the only layer that we have studied well is the bottom layer. We actually tried to look what was in canopies, and we actually rented a cherry picker that we realized once it was fully extended only went halfway up. It didn't get to the top of the canopy, and it was difficult to get it close to the branches. So we spent a lot of money and more or less failed trying to do a good job with that. So we have a very, very poor understanding of the animals that are living in the different layers of trees. We know more about the canopy life in the tropics than we do in the temperate zone, from all the work that's been done with canopy walks and balloon collecting techniques. They've spent a lot of time on it in the tropics, and we've pretty much ignored it up here. I suspect that there is not a whole lot of difference. It's a windier, drier place the farther up you go. So I think most caterpillars are a little bit lower, and I doubt if they separate out the way you're guessing, but it's not been measured. So maybe I'm wrong.
Okay. And then one more question is, I understand bur oaks have an issue. as well as some of our other species. Which oaks in the Chicago area are perhaps most resilient? Can you offer a recommendation?
The bur oaks have an issue with the diseases. Is that what you're saying?
I guess that was what was intended from Betsy.
Yeah, the bur oaks are in the white oak group, and I think they're suffering from oak wilt as well.
Oh, all right. Common.
Yeah.
I think, Grace, one person also made a comment here that maybe since you muted all of us, you muted yourself to go back and see if you can unmute us, and maybe you'd be unmuted. Okay. And we don't have sign language here. So on behalf of Grace and all of us, yes, here we go. Yes. That is the uniformly, all of our guests have said this is a phenomenally informative, tremendously interesting presentation, as I personally knew it would be. And I'm so glad that everyone could join us. And I think you've shared wonderful aspects of the value of the oaks. And I think we'll all look at our oaks that we possess much more warmly. And there was one person, guest, who asked, where can I find an oak, an acorn, should she imitate a blue jay? And I invite you to come to my property or stroll the streets of Glencoe, because it's dangerous right now to walk. We have so many acorns. And she also asked, is it best to plant just an acorn as opposed to any of the other types that you highlighted in your presentation?
Okay, let me talk about that real briefly. First of all, the white oak group germinates in the fall. So if you get a bur oak or a white oak or a post oak, you do want to get them at least in a pot in the fall, because they will put down their root in the fall. The red oak group you can put in a Ziploc bag with some peat moss in the refrigerator and keep it over the winter, and then plant it in the spring. The real danger to all of the oaks is that the rodents, the mice and things will dig them up and eat them over the winter time. So if you plant, I just put a whole bunch of white oak acorns in pots, and now I've got to figure out how to keep the mice from eating them all winter long, it's a challenge because they're good at getting in there. If you plant them straight into the ground, some of them certainly will survive, but the rodents and voles and things are after them all winter long as well. I did have real good luck once. I collected a whole bunch. I went to give blood once, and there was a red oak that had dropped its acorns all over the parking lot, and I couldn't stand to see them being squished. So I got a bucket and I filled it full of bucket, and I brought it home, and I didn't have any time, so I threw them out. A lot of them made it through the winter, and a lot of them germinated, and they're still in my property. So that was easy. But another time I planted 100 post oak acorns. None of them made it. They all got eaten. So, that's why I use pots now, but it's the mice. That's the challenge, getting them through the wintertime. You do want to expose them to the cold. Don't keep them inside all winter.
So perhaps a little chicken wire over the pot?
Yeah, if you wrap each pot, but they can get, the pots have little holes in the bottom.
Yes.
The bigger pot, they'll go in that way. They're clever little guys.
Persistence.
Now is the time. Now, don't wait, because if you wait, either the red oak group or the white oak group, the good acorns disappear fast. So you're in competition with everybody else that's out there.
Well, thank you so much. I think we've pretty much covered the spectrum of questions, and thank you to everyone for submitting yours. It's been informative for everyone. And Doug, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
And Grace, if you have another sign, give it to us.
Hope you get your voice back, Grace. Yeah.
We know that technology offers its parade of gremlins at inopportune times. So thank you. We've all suffered that, and we're all very sympathetic. So best travels. I know you go far from your chair in your tours, but thank you so much. This has been such an engaging and informative program.
Take care, everybody.
Best wishes for your fall.
Thanks.
And thank you to everyone for joining us tonight.